Alexis. So I'm Crystal McCreary, and I am an author of the Little Yogi deck.
I thought it's so cute.
Yeah, I know, it's so cute. I'm so excited. Speaking of creativity, I mean, that process, is always extended. When the creative process is that extended and protracted in many ways, when it finally is like you see the finished version of this creative output, it's very exciting. So obviously I'm also a yoga teacher, and I was an educator. I taught elementary school for many years, and a lot of my work with young people, required that I learn how to practice self-care, because I was experiencing very heightened amounts of stress during those early years. And this is when I was really young, in my early 20s, when I had youth on my side,
Right.
And so in the process of me learning yoga and recognizing like this relationship between the dancing that I was actually doing, because I was a dancer too, helped. These two tools were hugely impactful for my life in terms of helping me discharge stress. And when I integrated it into my classroom, it was supporting my kids as well. So I've been both an educator in a classroom, which I still do today, and as well as like yoga studios or embodied sort of contemplative spaces. I teach mindfulness. I do a lot of wellness coaching with private clients. And, these are all, for me, they were just sort of this personal practice that evolved, that I ended up sharing, I think largely because people asked me to. They were like, what is that thing you're doing? But I also, again, like I have a background as a creative. I have Master of Fine Arts in acting. And, what's funny actually about the last 9 months, under the duress and overwhelm and anxiety, right, of this time, I have found myself singing. I don't know if you've ever heard of Steps on Broadway in New York. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Girl, I'm taking their online classes and dancing in my living room, and I've been blown away by how healing it's been, and frankly, like how it's been. Like, I just remember at one point thinking, I need to scream, but I didn't want to scare my neighbors. So I thought, well, if I just scream on pitch, well, if I'm singing, then at least the sound I'm making might be relatively pleasing to someone's ear. And I called an old singing teacher, and I started singing again.
Okay.
And so a lot of my background as a performer, which I still get to do, these are all things that have shown up, like front and center. Like, it's for a moment like this that you have this whole toolkit. So I'm excited to share some of those in this conversation today. I realized that so many of my writing, so much of my like thoughts about creating curriculum, they arise. Like, this is a creative process, but if you don't have time and space to just kind of like let the kind of creative juices flow and let inspiration come, you miss that golden moment, right? And I've been, very indulgent. I've been able to be very indulgent, and I've realized that I don't want to necessarily go back to the old way, and I've been really trying to figure out, like, how can I prioritize this dream time, right? This sort of creative, like, psychic landscape, and center that, like, keep it in my life, but center it and prioritize it in the same way I've prioritized a yoga practice or a meditation practice. What are we all rushing off for? Like, what? I mean, we know, but at the end of the day, it's like, wait, but why do I need to be doing this? Is there a way to do this more efficiently?
Well, I'm glad that you brought that up, because there is this kind of balance between having extra time, but then having too much extra time, right? Because there's that space where you have it. I mean, that's something I suffer with right now specifically. So it's like, great, I have it. And I don't know what your sign is, but I'm a Pisces. So when you're like daydreaming, I was like, oh, I do this all the time. I've never had a problem with that even before
So
the
watery, yes.
pandemic. But yeah, it would be great to hear your thoughts, if you have any, on, you know, how do you harness that extra time so it is, and I don't want to say productive, because I don't think anyone needs to be productive, but at least maybe fulfilling or nourishing or something, because then there is that flip side. When you have too much space, it can become too empty or too anxiety provoking, or like there isn't enough, you know, fire to your feet to get you to do that thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have any kind of strategies or thoughts there.
Yeah, you know, so I think what we're talking about then is creating ritual, right? Or making a routine of this, and or making a routine of making time, right? And I think there is a difference between a routine and ritual. Like, you know, routines like brushing your teeth or taking a shower are not necessarily imbued with a devotional quality, like, you know, or a sacred quality for that matter. And, you know, ritual, when you make something, they say it takes 21 days in a row of something, right, to make it a habit. And the beautiful thing about that, although it takes tremendous discipline, like the average person is like, oh my God, it's so hard for me to commit to this. And, you know, I've been told, actually, I was just writing about this. I'm often, like, friends or people who know me they always refer to my yoga practice as, you know, the way I approach it as being very disciplined. And I always, you know, clarify, I'm like, actually, it's actually not really discipline. It's just very loving. Like, I love that time when I'm taking care of myself. I'm literally making love to myself, right? I'm nurturing myself. I'm listening to my body. I'm breathing more deeply. I'm moving in a very intentional way. And when you practice doing something in a devotional or loving way, it's really easy to keep coming back because you just feel so much better, you know. And you know, depending on the practice, you know, I think it could be argued, particularly with something like yoga or, oh, I don't know, running. I mean, there are lots of things that are really good for you, but they don't feel good.
Right. At least not to me.
Right. And so I feel like that's a key to it too. It's like, what are the small little practices that maybe don't even take a ton of time that actually really do feel good? Start there, you know, and things that are simple. Like, you know, one of my favorite morning rituals is something I've been doing for like 2 decades. Because the first time I read Julie Cameron's book,
The Artist's Way?
Yes, I was like, oh my God, yeah.
Okay.
That's my middle age brain. The words went right out of the brain. But yeah, The Artist's Way, you know, the morning pages practice.
Right.
It does. I mean, you wake up, your journal. It doesn't have to be a fancy journal. It could just be like a ring notebook. Open it up, do that mental dump of, you know, mental chatter that arises first thing in the morning. Just dump it in the like stream of consciousness, not even paying attention to grammar, as a sort of mental meditation, right? A way to clear that chatter, and do that every day for 21 days. Simple, right? It's not hard to do. It's hard to remember to do it, right? It doesn't even take a lot of time. It's not like you have to spend, you know, a whole hour doing it, right? I think she recommended 15 minutes, but 5 would do.
Yeah.
And, you know, make it accessible, right? They call them SMART goals, right? Something that's simple enough, accessible enough. You can measure it, but it's something within reason that you can actually do. And then it gets easier to add things that are that take a little more dedication or a little more output. But, you know, another simple evening ritual that also supports that sort of dream space or time is gratitude, right?
Right.
Like, I mean, there's so much research. I mean, there's literally like what's his name? Seligman. Dr. Seligman has done like gazillions of positive psychology research studies on how gratitude is a practice that supports well-being. And it doesn't take a lot of effort, just making a list, right? Naming the things, writing them in a journal that happened that day that you're grateful for.
Yeah.
Yes.
The other thing I really liked is that when we started off the conversation, we're like, we're going to talk about self-care strategies. And like, strategy sounds very formal. It's very like, you're going to do this, this, and this. I'm going to give you a program. Like, and talking to you, it's not so much what you're going to do. It's more of like the mind shift, how you're going to think about something. So I loved hearing you say this. It's not a, what did you say? It's not discipline. It's loving, because so often I think, particularly for me right now, being in an MFA program, you have to write a lot, and that requires discipline. But if you shift it to the sense of like, oh, but I love doing this, which is hard to remember sometimes, particularly when you're trying to get to a goal, that makes it a little bit easier. And I think gratitude too. And I like the idea that the self-care strategies we're going to talk about are really just more of like a list of words for people to maybe remember and tap into.
Yeah.
And then
you're bringing up something really, I think, important about this creative piece, though, which is, being in, because I've been in an MFA program, but not for writing, obviously. And I think one thing that you just said, which mirrors my own experience, was the fact that you're doing something you love, but it's like in this structure and in the confines of a setting and a setup where it's like, you have to execute your creativity like by a certain due date. And so I think that has benefits in the sense that it trains you to be able to write like in a way that is like not necessarily rooted in creative inspiration, right?
Oh, totally. There's nothing like a deadline to get you.
So the good news is like after an MFA program, you're kind of free and you can like, but the MFA program in an ideal world supports creatives, like, or in other words, any structured kind of disciplined or strategy, right? That kind of a setup or framework, it supports you to kind of discover like, what is my process? Like, what do I need? Like, and this took me a long time to realize, for instance, but as a writer, and I'm curious to know what your process is, but I'll have like an idea and I literally just have to let it float around in my mind. I can't, I might sit down and, get some like I have to let inspiration come, and I always know when it comes, and then I just dump, and once I realized that was my process, I stopped stressing about, like, I just give myself permission to take the time that I need, because I know that if I give myself the time, it will come, right? But when you're in an MFA program, you might not have that luxury. And so, I feel like the good news is like, there is this antidote. There is like this piece you can add to it, which is like just that rememory. Like, I actually do love this. I love this. And I can trust that, it may not be what inspirational, but like the way that I'm being trained to do this is going to help me learn something else about how I write, like what kind of a writer I am or what I might need, even if it's highlighting this structure is not what I need,
Yeah. I'm definitely someone that needs structure, which is why I was like, let's talk about the time thing and having too much of it, because without it, I kind of flounder. So definitely having that of like, okay, you're going to be submitting this at this date, and like, you don't have time to think about it once the deadline comes up, has been really helpful. But I think I'm also, the other part of having that structure and going through the program, right, is like, you kind of are, it's about a lot more than writing too. It's like a lot about where you're at personally, like how you feel in terms of your work or all these other things. And of course, we're going through a pandemic and everything's been online. But I think too, we were talking earlier and I was saying I was doing a lot of copywriting and a lot of more marketing stuff. So that side of my brain, which is like the personal writing that I've done, has been not turned off, but more dormant. And having, I think, both the freedom and the permission to tap into that like full time has been scary. So that like trust aspect you were talking about, being able to, one, trust that I can do it, or trust that whatever I end up writing will be what it needs to be versus what I want it to be or think it should be. So that's been a big part of it. And then, just kind of learning to trust all of that. But in terms of just the writing process in general too, for me, I found it's kind of dependent on what it's about. You know, like if I'm doing journalism, typically you'll want to get that out pretty fast. I'm like, okay, like this is the idea. These are all the sources I'm going to talk to. Like this is who I'm going to pitch it to. And I kind of bang that out. If it's a little more personal, I like kind of letting the idea be there, like writing in bed or just writing on my phone and like writing in these off moments where there isn't a lot of pressure. And then we were also talking about the copy stuff, and that's kind of, you know, that's nice because you like don't necessarily have to think too hard about what you want to say personally. It's more of like executing the goal. So I've liked having the variation, I think, throughout this whole thing. Something else that you had brought up was the fact that you're so attuned to having an embodied practice. And I think, you know, if you're a writer, you're particularly in your head a lot and disembodied at a computer. So maybe that's something we can talk about, ways people can learn to tap into their like embodied physicality, or those kinds of strategies that might help them get on that path of realizing this feels good, this doesn't feel good, this is a tweak I can make, this is something I want to continue or not continue. Because I've often found that sometimes the hardest part is just that recognition and awareness. So having someone kind of help you get there is really, really useful.
Yeah. I often, you know, remind people, particularly through the yoga and mindfulness that I teach, that we're dimensional human beings, right? We're not just talking heads, right? We have a body, we have a mind, we have an emotional component, we have, you know, a spiritual component, and you can feel free to decode that word in whatever way supports you. You know, for me, it's, you know, what brings my life meaning, you know, truth, love, liberation, right? But these elements of ourselves are often made quite disparate from one another, right? They're very disconnected, again, because of how we're, like the world that we're living in, right? And how it has this tendency to sort of fragment these elements of our being. And so embodiment is this recognition that, well, the body is the medium through which we experience the fullness of life. Our mind might be interpreting our experience, right? Our emotions might start in the mind and we might feel them in the body, or vice versa. But the actual experience of life is this is it. This is how we experience it. So doing things that connect you to the rich intelligence that your body actually has, because it's experiencing life just like your head is, right? That is worth, it's worth our time and attention, because, you know, again, like half the stuff that I think I get inspiration from, it doesn't start in my head, you know, it starts in my body. And there's a lot of research that actually is demonstrating that the tissue in our gut, you know how they say like follow your gut,
the mind body.
Yeah, it's like it's the same tissue as our brain, right? So, and when it comes to actual intelligence, right, it's here, but our body doesn't use words to communicate that intelligence. So, you know, consider like if you were someone who suffered an injury, right, and you didn't get like you broke a bone in your arm and you didn't get it set properly. You just sort of walk around in this distortion to your arm, right? Probably if that was the case. And so I feel like many of us are walking around like without the physical evidence that we're kind of this distorted version of ourselves, because we're disconnected from our bodies, but we don't realize it because again, like the appearance is we might have it together. And so I just think of it like the medicine, right? Connecting to your body, like practicing yoga, doing things that, you know, whether it's, it could be a HIIT class at the gym, that is your like physical juice. But, you know, this is like, you know, we need things to support our body to come back to that connected state. In the same way we might, you know, need a therapist if we've experienced, let's say, like someone if we lost someone due to COVID this year, right? You might consider, you would consider probably quite seriously going to talk to a professional, right? And so I feel like our bodies need that same attention and loving care, right? They're incurring all the stuff that's going on up here that might fragment us. And so, you know, the thing to also remember about our bodies is that, you know, when we talk about being more loving or being more generous, like cultivating these characteristics that we hold, you know, so near and dear to our, you know, idealist version of ourselves. Well, we often talk and like give lip service to these values, but if they're not lived in action, right, through our actual embodiment of them, then they don't really exist, right? And we've seen that also this year as we've sort of watched our world demonstrate a lot of values that have nothing to do with kindness or love or these ways of being that we're hardwired for, right? We're hardwired to connect to others, and yet we have a hard time embodying that. So I just think of it like, you know, if you're a writer, if you're creative, if you're not a creative, part of your coming into wholeness, right, as a human being, so that you can thrive in whatever capacity suits you, requires some connection to this thing right here, right? So you'd be surprised what happens, you know, when you do, I think.
A couple of other things I just want to talk about while we still have some time together is, in the last kind of 9-10 months, like, what have you been working on? Like, has it been hard to do that? Or are you just kind of accepting and going with everything?
Well, you know, it's funny because the year before the pandemic, I was offered a full-time role at a school that I was just working part-time at. And I was really reluctant to take it, you know, because I have this whole business and, you know, I enjoy the freedom of being, you know, a wellness professional. But something told me to take it. And I'm really glad I did, because having, well, benefits that someone else is paying for in this moment have been really great. So that, to be honest, since in the last year, that has taken, like, I have a full-time job, you know, teaching health and wellness and, you know, mindfulness through a social justice lens at a school in New York. And so, you know, that has definitely taken a huge, like, way more time than it did the first year, because now it's all digital. And so the learning curve and the extra work. So, you know, like the first few months of COVID, I hate to say it, but they were dreamy because everyone kind of backed off and didn't really do much at all. And then the fall hit, and my school was like, okay, we got to bring back the rigor, and, you know, we got to make it like just like we're in person, but it's all remote. And like all of a sudden my workload exploded. So but that said, also my personal business work exploded because people were all of a sudden recognizing, wow, I need tools to manage the anxiety and the trauma of this moment. That, you know, all that from, you know, all the racial protests in response to state sanctioned, you know, murder of so many Black or BIPOC, but definitely Black people, from the election to obviously the stress of living in a pandemic, being quarantined. And so I've also just spent a lot of time working with organizations that I lead a lot of professional development workshops. I did mention my little yogi deck, which is available on pre-order. It comes out February 2nd. I'm really excited. So I'm kind of in this process of, you know, gearing up for all the marketing around that, and which I'm kind of like, oh my God, I'm so nervous, because I'm like, again, like, I like having less. So adding all these things and getting back to that, you know, busyness addiction that we all get into. But I'm also really grateful to share and excited to share this resource with families. And then what's happening? What's happening? I don't know. think that's it. I think that's pretty much.
I mean, that's a lot. So I don't know if you need. I don't know if you need more.
I'm like, that sounds like, I can't believe I'm doing all that. And I'm like,
It's funny, right? When you look back and you're like, wow, I didn't know it while I was in it, but I did some stuff.
Yeah. So that's what's happening. How about you? What are you up to besides, are you working on a particular project in your MFA program at this point?
So I'm supposed to be writing, I guess, a book. I don't really know. It's not really a memoir. It's kind of essays, but it's all written in fragments, and it's all kind of the stories I've heard growing up just about my dad's family. And I don't speak Cantonese, which is what my popo speaks and what he speaks like a little bit of, because he immigrated when he was like 6. So it's kind of doing that. It's also doing some research into like post-colonial theory and maybe linguistic theory, and what it means not only to, I think, endure the trauma of migration and what's lost, even if like a lot is gained and you don't realize that. But also I think for me personally, what it means to be like a professional storyteller when you can't tell your own family story just through language. So it's all in the very kind of beginning stages, but that's kind of what I'm working through. And then in addition to that, I have my own freelance stuff. So working with a variety of clients. One I'm really excited about, they were a Glossier Black-owned business grant recipient, and they're launching beauty products for women of color, specifically for melanin pigmented skin. So I've been doing all their editorial and getting to work with writers, and that's been really gratifying, particularly right now. So I too feel like there's been a lot going on despite being sequestered at home. Grateful to be with my family right now and somewhere warm. So
same here. I mean, well, to be with family. I'm not anywhere warm at the moment, but I'm grateful to be with family.
But I'm so happy we spoke. I feel like I personally have a lot of things to take into my own life now moving forward. Just to recap, like the words I wrote down again, like approaching more practice and discipline with, love. I think also just carrying a sense of gratitude into everything, giving yourself permission, I think, to like feel the things or have the space or, be. And then I think that mindful attention you mentioned, and screaming on pitch. I think those are all of our self-care strategies, right?
Yes, I can't wait to have the next time I see you or see you on Instagram or something that you're like sharing.
Oh yeah.
Taking some singing lessons or just screaming on pitch in your living room.
To rent. That'll be me. You'll hear me all the way from your apartment, wherever you are.
I'd love that. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Crystal.